We have Heather Trumpfheller here with us this morning. She is a community builder and tech leader in Austin, passionate about creating connections that drive impact. She is Chief Growth Officer at Switchboard, serves on the board of Austin Bridge Builders Alliance, and is active at her church, Red Rocks Austin. A lifelong learner and adventurer, she is usually reading, exploring, or outdoors in the sun. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you. Hi. Thanks for having me here today. We said we probably love the virtual options the morning after the Super Bowl. So hopefully everyone is out of the food comas and ready to go. But I told Madeline I'm not going to do slides today. And instead, I really was just going to walk through my journey and my career pivots and share some of the resources that really helped shed a light on what I wanted to do next and give me hope as well as a plan here. So I'll really just jump in and share a little bit about my story, just so you have some of the context and the background. But I grew up in Dallas, Texas, and I always wanted to be a journalist. I said from like age 3, I would walk around with a hairbrush, interviewing my mom's friends, and I always felt like I was put on this earth to tell people stories. And being the stubborn little girl I was, I stayed on that path. I said I was going to be a journalist, so I'm going to be a journalist. I went to University of Missouri. I studied broadcast journalism there. I worked for NBC for 4 years as a reporter and anchor. And then really I wanted to pivot, but I didn't know how. And I think that's something that we all still face, right? Giving ourselves permission slips to make a change is super hard, especially when we vocalize that we were going to do something. And so I had to balance between, am I ready for a career pivot or am I just wanting a change? And then I ultimately pivoted into public relations, moved back to Dallas, worked at a PR firm there, worked there for a year, and then honestly had this divine interaction with a gentleman in a grocery store, was in the self-checkout line just talking to this stranger, and really he just asked, like, what do you do? And I told him, I said, I'm a journalist. I love meeting people, sharing their stories, advocating on their behalf. And he was like, oh, so you're in sales? And I was like, no, I'm a journalist. And it was the first time I ever had someone not directly connected to me be able to like see things about me that I hadn't even seen, right? Like he was able to say, okay, you think that you're a journalist, which is fair, but let me tell you how these are transferable skills to the industry that I'm in, which was technology. So he gave me his business card and ultimately was like, call me if you want to make a change. And I had gone home that night and I looked at his business card and I was like, I should just give him a call. And so I did. And he literally was like, why don't you come into my office, like see what my tech company does essentially, right? Because I told him, I was like, I'm a journalist. I've never made a resume. I've never been to a job fair. I was a journalist for NBC, which is how I like got my next role. I don't even really know what these other industries are. And if many of you are wondering the same thing, right, when you're asking yourself, like, what do I want to do next? It's so hard when you don't know all the jobs out there. But there's also so many niches and jobs that we wouldn't even imagine. So I think what I've learned from him essentially was he asked me, how do you want to feel at work? And I don't know about you, but I had never given myself permission to ask that. To me, work was supposed to have this purpose, like, oh, I have a job to make money, or I have a job to have benefits, or like we assign specific purposes to our jobs, often from a monetary perspective. But he had asked me, he was like, well, how do you want to feel at work? And I have since always asked myself that same question, right? And I think it feels a little countercultural. And also, I do want to acknowledge that if you're in a season where you have been out of work for a long time, like you might assign a purpose to a job in a different capacity, right? It might be like, we really do need the finances for our mortgage right now, or things like that. So I do know that there is often a luxury that comes with that question. But I do also think not enough people ask that question of how do I want to feel? And then when they don't feel a certain way at work, they're not treating it like a ministry or community or a place where that they can always serve, right? It sometimes feels very transactional. So I just want to even ask people if they want to like write it in the chat or if anyone wants to unmute. Have you ever asked yourself regarding your profession how you want to feel? Or is that so foreign?
If I may, actually, to be quite honest, I was never really asked that about myself because during a time I was in college, but it wasn't a very good time because during that time, it was in 2020. So during that time, a lot of internships just went out the window. A lot just closed. And by the time next year, the following year after that, when I graduated, I didn't really have anything to show for it. So I was just drifting here and there until I started working as an e-noter with this refinance auto company called Trestle. And I worked for them for several years. I really, enjoyed working my way up. I was a e-notary, and then I was a business development representative, and then I was an underwriter until last September. They laid off my entire senior department and my boss, doing like transitioning over to not only company restructure but also AI. It was just like a little bit ridiculous how they did it, but it is what it is. So up until that point, I never really asked myself of how I want to
Right.
feel. But if I were to answer that, I just kind of want to feel like, I prefer to be kind of behind the scenes operations kind of guy and try to like help out with other colleagues in case they have questions, kind of sort of thing.
Yeah,
Because
and I
that's
think those are really good. Yeah, like wanting to know how you feel, how you want to feel at work is super important. Like I love that
Mhm.
you are starting to like ask yourself that. And I will actually screen share and show you here. This is a matrix that I essentially built out when doing this, right? So this is actually mine. Like I'm getting real vulnerable here on the call today. Like this was mine in a season of unemployment where I'd ask myself, how do I want to feel? What are my must haves? What do I absolutely need in my next role? What are my nice to haves? What's not required, but would be absolutely wonderful? What will I avoid in my next role? And these are role specific, career specific, and company specific, right? So it sounds like you did some career pivots from a role perspective, or maybe what you were having tasks with at work. Like, what do you enjoy? How important is growth at your company for you? Do you want to be in a specific industry? For me at the time, I was working remotely. I also stopped drinking alcohol and I was in a sales role, and all of my happy hours were like drinking centric, or I had no women in leadership on my team, or really things that were really important to me. I had just shifted from the company perspective, from a job perspective, as well as a career perspective. So I asked myself to write out these criteria, if they were must have, nice to have, red flag, and then how I was going to determine if those were important to me and determine if that company or role had that as well, right? So when I was on my career pivot from public relations to technology, I feel like I then got thrown into roles because, again, this person believed in me. I got into a recruiting role, which we'll talk about in a second, and I ended up working my way up. So the gentleman I met in the central market, I worked for 10 years. And then I actually found Jesus in the pandemic, or Jesus found me in the pandemic, I'll say. And I was already in the marketplace. So I was then reversely going through this. Okay, now how do I assign purpose to my job now that I have purpose in Jesus, right? And so I was reverse kind of asking those questions that I think a lot of Christians already have been asking when they enter the marketplace. But for me, I'd started getting angsty at work. And I don't know about you, if you chose your season of unemployment or if it was like forced upon you, if it wasn't a great situation, if you loved your job, whatever it might be. For me, I ultimately had so much anxiety at work because I was tying my worthiness to achievements. And I was producing, I felt really meaningless. I felt really hollow. I had written down, okay, God, make it obvious if you want me to leave. And I got on my one on one with my director, who did not know God, and was like, I think we need to talk about a different role for you. And I was like, look at what I wrote in my prayer journal today. And then I was like, I quit. And he was like, no, I meant internally. And I was like, I understand. I haven't been looking. I haven't been saving. I had no intentions to quit, but like the creator of the universe just made this obvious. So I'm going to follow that. And the whole time, God kept telling me, I just need you to unlearn what you think about work. I need you to untie your worthiness from achievement. I need you to realize you're a human being, not a human doing. But he also wanted me to enter the workforce again with boundaries and intention of how I wanted to feel. So I'll share this matrix at the end, but I do think it's really important to start asking yourself how you want to feel, whether it's role, career, or company. And I also think that should be like your filter, right? So if someone sends you a job that maybe says data analytics and that's the space you're in, but you know it's on site every day or 1099 and benefits are really important for you or whatever it might be, having sort of this threshold sort of helps as that lens of like, am I going to pour energy into applying to that? Because you probably have all seen whether you're applying to your dream job or a job you don't really want, they both take energy and effort. And then I think too many people, because we hear the phrases like looking for a job is a full-time job, we then start going back into that productivity and metric centric. And then that actually makes the scarcity mindset. And then you might end up applying to a job that really aligns with your matrix, but you're burnt out from applying for jobs that don't fit. So I think getting a good plan from the beginning is really great. And so you're able to start dreaming, you're able to start looking proactively. But I also think it's really important to reactively look at your career, right? Like how you want to feel might be because you know how you don't want to feel, right? And so for me, when I started mapping this out, I started also seeing that I had a lot of transferable themes in my career. And I was narrowing it down because when I left the tech company, I knew what I didn't want to do, but I had no idea what I wanted to do. And so I started doing what I called this career narrative. Essentially, let me screen share sorry, wrong one. All right. This was really my career narrative when I was going through it. I sat down and I went through my resume or really through all of my past careers, my LinkedIn, looked at everything, and I said, map out my past. What were my roles, right? I was president of Austin Women in Technology. I was a delivery manager at a tech company. I had been in an account management role. I was in a recruiting role. And then I went through my last really big roles that I had had, and I looked at my core responsibilities. What was I accountable for, and how did I feel in those? What were my accomplishments? How did they measure success? And how did I feel about that? What did I enjoy about the role and dislike, right? It can be simple things like I really aligned to the mission and I loved the flexibility of the company. Or I didn't like that there was a lack of boundaries and that there was some toxic people in my work environment. Or what are the core skills you learned? And then I started looking at these patterns. What was coming up in all of my past roles? Whether you work at a company for 30 years or you work at a company for 18 months, right? You're going to have different seasons where you have different roles and responsibilities. And so I do think it's important to realize which ones did you resonate well with, right? And so looking at my past experience, I started pulling out what were the common themes. I started seeing it was impact and leadership and collaboration, a competitive nature, a place where I could still personally grow. Where was I being fulfilled, right? When I was brokering meaningful connections or being in community or being still in a storytelling capacity. What was motivating me? What was the environment like? How did I want to receive feedback? And then honestly, with AI, I would say almost even dump some of this into ChatGPT and say, what are some threads you see about me? And see if those relate to you. And then I actually started asking people. I would say my two themes I see in my career history was I'm an activator and a collaborator. You worked with me. Do you agree with that? Do you think that that's how I show up? And then I started actually validating that with the people around me. And then I was able to summarize my past in this context, right? So I made essentially what I called my career narrative, which was a couple of sentences in story form. Like this is like truly my process of like doing it, right? I started iterating each of them and then I wove it together into like a story so that if you meet me, you take away Heather is an activator, a community builder, and relationships are her driver and her superpower. And that's how it shows up on my resume. Because what I started learning too was, especially when you're career pivoting, you have to be able to allow them to visualize you into the role that you're applying for, right? It's less about what are you already qualified for and what have you already done, and more, can they visualize you in that opportunity that you're applying for? So I'll go through a little bit of my resume in a second, but any questions on like the matrix or career narrative? Is this make sense? Is this foreign to you?
I have a quick question. So, in the grocery store checkout line, obviously your resume didn't matter. You didn't know anything about your history or your desires or your wants. What do you think stood out? Was it your personality? Was it the fact that you're attractive? Was it the fact that you had a great opening statement? What do you think
Yeah.
initiated the engagement and for it to continue once it started?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I would say I essentially had this career narrative down. When this gentleman was like, "Oh, what do you do for work?" I was able to say things like, "I'm a journalist because I love meeting people, sharing their stories because I'm ultimately an activator. I love communication. I value this." And I was able to weave in my personal strengths with my professional expertise, not in a way though that it read like a job description. So that's my
Mm.
biggest hang up with resumes is that when you read them, they often read like a job description. But when you tell about your experience, it's more in narrative anecdote form. And so exactly, I was armed in the grocery store with a 2-minute spiel about who I was, what potential I could offer, right? I wasn't talking to him about a specific role. It was really tell me what you're passionate about. What are your threads in your career that stand out? But you also get to decide what they learn about you. And I think that's where a lot of times people on their resumes, they write really, again, it reads more like a job description because they write out all the bullets of what they did. But you also are getting to tell the interviewee what you want them to ask you about. And so I feel like that's essentially, I was able to tell this man in the grocery store about me in a way that when he asked questions, I was wanting to, there were already things I was passionate about or already things I aligned with because I was giving him the feedback or I was giving him the information that I would feed back to me, if that makes sense, Jeff. So having that, we'll talk about networking in a second too. I often think networking is crucial, right, when you're job seeking, but also one of the hardest seasons because the first question most people ask you is, what do you do? And if you're not armed with an answer or if you're insecure about that answer, right, because you didn't choose your season of unemployment, right, then you show up a little bit differently. So I think everyone should be armed with like, here, let me tell you about my career narrative. Let me tell you 2 minutes about myself that I want to control what you take away about me, but also so that when you maybe hear about an opportunity, you will think of me and you'll visualize me in there. Okay, so I'll show my resume. And again, I ended up hiring a career coach. So let me pivot backwards again. So quit my job after 10 years in tech, had no expectations or intentions of quitting, really embarked on this season of healing, putting up boundaries, figuring out what do I want to do, getting my ducks in a row, because you will also often hear, which is probably why you're all in this room together or on these screens together, is you keep hearing things like you have to play the game or the job market's tough. Well, those are very valid, but I also think people need to know what they want to communicate to people in the job market. So I wanted to take a step back and actually get that aligned. And so I did hire a career coach to one, give me feedback, but two, to have someone who was non-biased about what job I got next, but really to help me from like get my resume in line, get a cover letter in line, practice this type of thing with, right? And I think it's awesome that you have this space, but I had someone that I was essentially like paying to listen to my career narrative to give me feedback and to be like, how does that sound? What was succinct? Did you take these things away from me? And so I do think it's awesome that you're already in this room having this and like definitely lean on this community here. But so I hired a career coach and then we essentially built out this resume. And this again is mine. And so I'll kind of walk you through some of the sections. But instead of writing my resume like a job description, I actually wrote down my themes. What do I want them to know about me? I want them to know that Heather is a community and partnership strategist. She leads with inquiry and curiosity. She's an effective communicator. And those are the same bullets on each of my jobs because I wanted them to know those 3 things about me is really what you need to know. You can also learn things about like hitting quotas or, how many contracts I had or my metrics. Like those things are important, right? You need to obviously show that you have what you've accomplished or these drive to the stories and these narratives, right? But I got to tell them what I wanted them to know about me. And so I had the same 3 transferable themes that I had built through here, right? From my matrix, what I learned about me going through my reactive, what I wanted to make sure I communicated with them. So I ultimately built my resume with my name. I actually put the job that I was applying for, and we'll talk about that for candidate tracking in a second, had access to my information and my LinkedIn, right? Quick summary about myself, my relevant experience, the company, the title, the years, the location, if that's important. But really, again, it was the same transferable themes throughout my whole resume to tell this cohesive story. So that also, when they came over to my LinkedIn, it's less about fact checking, does my title aligned? And this to me is the visual way that you're representing this. So I also wanted them to see, okay, Heather's a community and partnership strategist. She leads with inquiry and curiosity. She's an effective communicator. Does her LinkedIn reflect that? Whether it's the language, like, okay, I use the word community and connector and connections here, or is it through my activity? Oh, she's going to networking events. Okay, she truly does value, effective communication or partnership strategies. Okay, we see that she has these volunteer opportunities where she has, been a president of a board. So I'm assuming she leads with curiosity and inquiry, right? Like I wanted my LinkedIn to validate that, but also from a personality perspective, right? So, like, if you come down here and you read this, like, I also want them to know these things about me. Like, I love Jesus. I love traveling. Like, you can kind of see my personality coming through here because that's, again, when they read this, I want them to visualize Heather working for them in that role. So, that's a little bit about my resume there. And then let me show you this tool that I love. So has anyone heard of the tool Skill Syncer? Okay. It is essentially a link that is free. I think you get 10 a day. You upload the job description that you're applying for, and then you upload your resume, and it will essentially tell you what percent you will get through the candidate tracking system and what their suggestions are to change. They might be things like words, right? Like you use the word connector and the job uses the word partnerships, or you use software engineer in your resume and they call it a software developer. Or it might be things like you have the job description has a lot about risk analysis and your resume has nothing about that. I'm able to see I don't want to do risk analysis, but when I read that job description, I skipped over that knowledge because I didn't have it. But I'm actually learning now because of this analysis here that that's a big part of the job description. So this is a good way to start playing the game. You can ultimately pay for it if you want it to like tailor your resume for you, but I think you get 10 free a day where it'll essentially tell you this. So what I would do is I would pop the job description in here, I would pop my resume in here, and I would do a first, how much percentage am I aligned? If I'm like 20% aligned, that might be because that's maybe not a job that I actually want, but I'm having a little bit of scarcity mindset, right? Like, or the title is aligned, but when they further read the job description, I learned it's actually quite a lot of skills that just I don't only not have, but I don't want to do. Right? So having a first glance at that, but it'll also give you those suggestions and tell you things like maybe add chief of staff at the top of your resume. So chief of staff pulls in the candidate tracking system, but also so when that hiring manager reads your resume, they know what job you're applying for. Or it'll give you feedback like that. So I'll make sure you get that resource there, but it's called Skill Syncer. And that was essentially a huge value add for me. So that again, I stopped having my resume read like a job description, more tell the story about me, the threads that interwove there, as well as played the game of the candidate tracking system. But the last thing that I'll say that really helps, right, is networking. And network before you need it, right? Like this is a crucial time to network when you're looking for a new role, but also don't be so rigid of your thinking of networking, right? It might be someone in the grocery store. Like truly shared that story, just knowing that it does not actually matter where you meet them. Networking is all things, right? It might be on a dog walk at your dog park and you're talking to someone, or you're at a book club and you're saying things like, I really want to get into the healthcare industry. Do you know, like your husband's in healthcare? Can I chat with them about that, right? LinkedIn was super intentional when they used the word second connection because there is power of someone not directly connected to you, but they have an access to a door that you might need to be a part of. So imagine again, you're applying to Dell and Oracle and same resume, same job description, you're 60% on Skill Syncer for both, etc. But you know that your next door neighbor works at Dell. You're applying with a little bit more confidence because you're trusting that you already have someone in the door who will put eyes on it or maybe push your resume further. To me, that is what networking is. And I don't think you have to have as deep of levels of connections as maybe you think you do, right? Like you have to be consistent because getting to know someone is how you build trust and they're more likely to stick, they'll like suggest your name to a hiring manager if they've maybe met you a couple times or things like that. But you might meet someone, add them on LinkedIn, like myself, like add me on LinkedIn. And then if I'm connected to someone or a company, shooting someone a tailored LinkedIn message of like, hey, Madeline, I see you're connected to this person. I'm actually applying for a role out there. Do you mind brokering that connection? And people are really willing to do that, especially here in Austin. Like people genuinely want to help each other. And so I think really leaning into that, but also continuing to network when you land your job, right? Because to me, I also started telling myself, it's less pressure on landing my dream job. It's about the next job. Like this next job you get might not be the last job that you're in. So constantly being familiar with these types of experiences, building your resume, what's the job market look like, but having new connections might make it constantly easier to one, either not stay at a job that you're not a good fit for because of that scarcity mindset, because maybe you already have that network. But two, it'll humanize the job seeking process too, because you're actually building those connections there. So that's huge. I also think networking with recruiters, some people have positive experiences, some people don't. I wanted to just share my lens from that. For me, the recruiter's essentially networking on your behalf, right? You're also not compensating that recruiter. Like you do not pay for them. They get paid out of your salary, but they will often negotiate a higher salary on your behalf, knowing that they're compensated out of that. But they're essentially networking on your behalf. They're building direct relationships in that industry, in that company, whether with it that skill set, right? If you're wanting to be a cloud engineer, there are recruiters who specify in that, maybe in the FANG big tech or maybe in the healthcare industry, whatever it might be. So do a quick Google search or quick AI search and ask like maybe are there recruiters that are project management specific in government tech in Austin? And there probably are some. Network with them. When they essentially get to know you and build trust with you, they're networking on your behalf in an extremely intentional way so that your name will go further, if that makes sense. So definitely that networking now, right? Using your LinkedIn to network. Any other questions on that? And then I'll just open it up for discussion.
Heather, when you were looking for a job search coach, how did you go about that? Because if I ask 10 different resume writers, recruiters, hey, look at my resume, I'm going to get 10 different
Totally.
perceptions, 10
Yeah.
different answers. So, how did you decide on one? And once you did, I mean, were you committed down that one path? So, you didn't care about what other people thought. You were going down a very specific path. So, can you tell us about your
Yeah,
selection
absolutely.
process? And did you waver from that or did you commit fully? And
Yeah, I think a lot of people will hire a specific like resume writing coach or hire someone to like revamp their LinkedIn brand, etc. When I went about this, I said, I want to be able to tell one cohesive story of Heather. So I want the same person for all of these. But I also said, I don't want someone to do it for me, like teach a man to fish. Because I was at a company for 10 years. And to be honest, like it was amazing for a lot of it, but I also feel like I stayed longer because I was afraid of the unknowns. And I told myself, I don't want to be afraid of the unknowns again. I don't want to be so gripping my job that a layoff sounds like the worst like news because maybe I'm a little more equipped or more armed with that. So I also wanted to hire someone who was going to teach me how to fish. And so I treated it kind of like dating. Like I had a couple calls with some people. A lot of people will do like free consultative, 30-minute call. I have to trust them because they also have to trust me. And then I looked at the same question, how do I want to feel? At the end of every interaction, if I felt like, oh wow, they were so salesy, I don't feel like they actually cared about me, that's probably not a good fit, right? But if you left that call and you were like, wow, they said this, that was really inspiring, or their process I really aligned with, right? Like the way you're looking for a job is super unique to you. I knew I was going to be a networking centric person. That is also why I felt like I had to be gone from my company to look because I wanted to be able to like fully look, like post about it on LinkedIn and use my network, etc. So I hired someone who was also networking centric, more storytelling focus, and less from like a technical perspective, right? But you might find a career coach who's very specific within healthcare industry or someone who's really aligned for that. For me, I needed help with the ethereal type questions, right? Which essentially kind of you're doing purpose works for a lot of that. So hopefully that answers your question, but I think treating it like dating is critical because if you're going to invest your time and your money in this person, you have to truly trust that they believe in you and that they're going to fight for you. Like mine then gave me negotiation role plays. It was like all the way through the process from the mapping out what do I want to do to building my resume to how to successfully network it, right? I used to send her Loom videos of me practicing these role plays and she would just critique them, right? So it was someone I was also okay with being vulnerable with and uncomfortable with, but I also received her feedback well. So great question. And John, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, um, do a little coaching of myself with people, and it is the relationship is important. Like anything, you want people that you sync with. But I also know that I get bombarded by these recruiters sometimes, like supply chain management recruiters, sales recruiters, or you're going into these big holes. And I've had recruiters reach out to me with that. And I think any important businesses with the relationship with the recruiter itself, regardless of who you know, it's always important to have a recruiter and maintain that relationship even after you get a job. Have you seen these things like the supply talent group or the business talent group or the project management talent group recruiters coming out? And how was your
Yeah.
feelings on that?
Yeah, and I think again, it's probably the same advice as like when looking for a career coach, it's also kind of like dating, right? So for me, when I was in the role of recruiting, I would get connected to someone, right? It would be like John and Heather. Heather's the recruiter, John's the candidate looking. Let's get on a video call, right? It's building rapport. It's you asking me things like, where do your current network lie? What jobs have you recently been filling? Who do you talk to frequently, right? When I was in the government recruiting space, I would be able to tell you, like, I have a call with TxDOT this week, or I met with Department of Motor Vehicles yesterday, or these are the recent jobs filled, or this is the team that this is hiring for. So I'm able to tell you as a recruiter my lens and access that you would be getting by partnering with me, but I'm also building trust with you, right? Like, what are you wanting to do? Is that realistic? Is that reasonable? Like, are you looking for a like based on my market expertise, do I think that you would be someone who would be aligned with some of these roles, vice versa? So it's building out that rapport. But I do think people don't realize like network or recruiters often have standing calls with these companies, right? Or they will reach out to them and be like, okay, Dell is going to fill this role through this recruiter. But then once it's filled, we're going to open it so that candidate can apply. But unfortunately, when that role is opened that you see and get excited about, it's already been filled because of the recruiter. So recruiters are often getting access to roles before they open because the hiring managers are measured on that success. And so they're feeding these recruiters that information before they need it, right? They're going to tell them things like Q2, I'm getting headcount. I'm already going to know who I'm going to hire. So on April 1st, I can open that role and they already get started type of thing. So I think a lot of it playing the game at these companies, especially if you're company specific or role specific, recruiters have access to jobs that you like far before you will see them. But you have to build.
One question I got is there's also this chat GTP thing out there with Clay that will pull the names of the people recruiting and the hiring managers. Are you familiar with Clay?
Yeah, but I think pulling it is one thing, but building rapport with them is
Is
another.
another thing.
So to me, the recruiters are often building rapport with those hiring managers so that when I LinkedIn DM, okay, I see that Clyde, you're the hiring manager on this. I just applied for that. That's super different than that recruiter saying, hey, Clyde, I filled the last 6 roles on your team. Let me introduce you to John. He's a great fit. So yeah.
I also use Steve Dalton's 2 hour job search where he insists that you have an advocate inside, not just the hiring manager, but advocate inside the manager.
Yep.
JT O'Connell says, find people you know that already work in there, start building your relationships of the organizations in your top 10. Both
Yeah.
Henry and Steve talk the same thing.
Yeah.
It's become more of a relationship rapport type thing. and the
Yeah.
companies you want to work with.
I want to
That's
make
what
sure
I'm
I
saying.
don't miss any other questions in here. And Melanie, yes, I would love to look at that. And real quick, or John, I'll let you ask your question, then I'll share one more
Yeah,
quick thing.
I was wondering where you came up with the list of threads that you were weaving in throughout the resume and LinkedIn,
Yeah,
the
really.
specific phrases.
Yeah. So when I was like, that's why I went through a whole essentially like iteration process, right? Like I started by dumping them up here in like bullet forms. And then I was able to actually look at patterns based on all of these. And so it was really more of like iteration format by asking further questions, right? And so I posted
Gotcha.
these link in the chat here, but I started asking my questions and then I was able to pull these, right? You might even ask like ChatGPT, what are themes that you're seeing that I'm not seeing? Because you, John, might be so narrow on the like, oh, I must pull that I'm analytical. But maybe they actually look at it that you're like logical and realist with data or something. Like they might use language that might be like really eye-opening for you. And that was essentially what I did. I did this pre really chat GPT, but so I did it in like iteration format. What words do I keep seeing? And then that's a great question because then I would actually read a job description or see a post on LinkedIn for a job and I would read it and I would be like, does that align with these transferable themes? Or what language are they using that I'm really excited about? Why am I excited about that job? And then I just started pulling those out. But mine started just being like really obvious themes at my last four companies, like why I took those jobs, why I succeeded at those roles. I think it'll be more obvious than you realize. And then I just use that as that lens there.
Okay, I really was wondering if there were some standard lists of these phrases that people can use, but ChatGPT would definitely give you something that's used frequently, I would think. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. And then the last thing I'll share too is pivot again, right? Journalists, public relations, then I went into recruiting, then I went into sales, then I went into government contract management, pivoted again, and really asked myself, how do you want to feel, right? And I feel so lucky that God has then since been using me at a tech startup called Switchboard. And if you're not familiar, we essentially connect Christians with missionaries. So, say you are a graphic designer, or you're a website creator, or you're a homeschooling mom or dad. How could a missionary who is overseas, called to love, they be the hands and feet of Jesus, or they're a church plant here domestically, or they're a nonprofit that's focusing on the Great Commission, they're called to love people, but maybe they are not great at designing something in Canva or a social media strategy, or your homeschool curriculum could really be beneficial for them. It's how do we share the load there? So we've actually built out, so here's our site real quickly, and I'll show you how people have been using this in the job seeking space. Is we actually have a skill assessment on here, right? You guys more than anyone are probably taking skill assessments all the time, but we essentially want to route you to roles that align with your area of expertise from a serving capacity. So this is mine, right? Okay, Heather, what we learned about you. You're great at storytelling, and here's how this can help unreached people groups. You mentor people, and here's how this can help the Great Commission. You build partnerships for a living, here's how this can help in the missions world. And then Switchboard, my tech startup, essentially connects me to serving opportunities to use the skill sets I want to use so that I could come on here and I can actually see, okay, Lauren, this missionary, Laura is in Mozambique. Here's what she's doing. She needs someone to help with a social media strategy. Say I'm you and I'm looking to apply for a job in the social media world. This is actually a great way to get real life experience in a season when you're not working, where maybe you can have recent stories to share. So recently, there was a gentleman that I actually met through the Austin Ridge Job Seekers Network. He was looking for a job, wanted to get into more mobile development versus just back end development, took a role on Switchboard where he was essentially going to be helping a missionary build a mobile app. They taught him some of the skills. He used them, took it off their plate, built the mobile app, and then brought that mobile app to an interview at Keller Williams and ended up getting this job in a mobile app development because of his recent experience, but also a recent anecdote, right? So people are less afraid of your career gap on your resume, but they do want to know does this person want to be doing this, right? So if you tell them things like, okay, yes, I got laid off last year, but in the meantime, I've been volunteering and like, check out this app that I just built. I didn't know this tech language 6 months ago. So this shows that I'm a quick learner, that you don't even have to question that. When I say things like, I'm a quick learner, here's an example of how I learned this skill set, or how I kept my skills sharp during this season, or how volunteerism is really important to me because I'm loyal and I care about this cause, or whatever it might be. So I definitely think serving is also a really beautiful way to learn some skills, or to also get some of these real life, how do I want to feel, right? Because when you're doing something because of a serving capacity, maybe you're actually learning you really like a skill set more than when you're like compensated for it, or you don't have it for work boundaries, etc. So I'll make sure you have the link there too. But check out Switchboard. It's all virtual volunteering within your skill sets. So maybe this is also a great opportunity to add something to your resume recently, or have an anecdote for an interview about that too. So I think I'm at time. So I will pause and let Madeline direct me if so.
Looks like you have one more question, Heather. So if you want to answer
Great.
that,
Yeah.
and then we can wrap up after that. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Yeah.
So Heather, this is Jeff again. So in this working with this job search expert, did you get to a point where it's like, okay, this is a specific job I want to look at? Or did you do this exercise for like, I want possibly to look at this industry or possibly to look at this career move? And so did you have one path or did you have multiple paths that you were actually looking at and considering?
Great question. Yeah, multiple paths, because I also think you will end up having multiple resumes for each path as well. But then once you start narrowing it down, right, you're not going to end up having 6 or 7. I had basically 3 for each of my threads, but they were all showcasing there, right? Like, those are the 3 main things about me. All of the jobs I was applying for had those. But when I first started with my matrix, that was really like, didn't even know how to look for a job because I had no idea what I wanted to do. So the matrix helps me narrow that down. And then my career narrative is what I would essentially put next to these job descriptions, that I would be like, oh, I think a chief of staff role would be really interesting, but then more of a sales partnerships. But both of them, I still get to be the activator and the communicator and the community builder. So I was able to see that, but then my resume showed different things, or highlighted different things, but they still aligned with who I am, which is why my LinkedIn was able to essentially validate and verify that regardless of the path that you're going on, but your language of your resume might change. That was another reason how I used Skill Syncer pretty well, is I would post in, say, my partnerships resume, but the job description was for chief of staff, but it would tweak it a little bit, like change your language here. But it was ultimately still the role that I was doing, right? I wasn't like embellishing on that. I was just changing some of the language or highlighting some of the different things. So you will, Jeff, most likely have a couple of different resumes for different paths, but you will probably be able to build the same paths from your matrix or your career narrative threads.
Wonderful. That was great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
This has been awesome, Heather. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing part of your journey with us. And I know it was super insightful for me as well. So you shared some great tips and some things that I think are going to be amazingly helpful to our job seekers. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. And yes, I will make sure that Madeline sends out these resources as well as my information. Like, seriously, if you want to Loom record your career narrative, I would love to watch, right? And give you feedback and champion you, or broker any connections I have. I am also often networking here in Austin. Like, I'll be at the Austin Women in Tech event on Thursday if anyone's in the tech world. But yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'll make sure Madeline has that, but would love to be a resource. And thanks for having me this morning.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you.